Please all rise. Please be seated.
Welcome, everybody. I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Augustina Dechegme Achigibah will defend the academic thesis. The end point of it is abstinence, determinants of adoption and implementation of reproductive health education in Ghana. Mrs. Achigibah, can I invite you to give a summary of your studies?
Dear Pro-Rector, Corona present, assessment committees, family and friends present here and online, thank you so much for this opportunity to present my thesis titled, The End Point of It is Abstinence, Determinants of Adoption and Implementation of Reproductive Health Education in Ghana. I deem this research very important because despite the several policies and programs in Ghana, we still face challenges related to adolescent sexual health. Therefore, my thesis explores a central question. Why is sexual and reproductive health education difficult to adopt and implement in Ghana, despite its importance? Adolescence, a period of rapid physical, emotional growth, is often characterized by risky sexual behaviors, resulting in adverse sexual health outcomes, such as unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, and STIs. Evidence shows that in Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rates of adolescent pregnancies, with over 90 births per 1,000 women. And in Ghana, the 2022 Demographic Health Survey shows that 15% of adolescents have experienced a live birth or pregnancy. And besides the high rates of unintended pregnancy, Ghana also records between 16 to 18,000 new annual HIV infections among adolescents per the Ghana AIDS Commission reports. So these diverse challenges point to the need for sexual and reproductive health education, as it equips adolescents with the knowledge, the skills to make informed decisions about their sexual health. So recognizing the importance of sexual and reproductive health in Ghana, since independence, we've had a good policy environment and a history of curriculum-based sexual and reproductive health education in our school. So we have the National Population Policy, the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy, the National HIV, AIDS, and STI policies, all of which seek to provide information and services to adolescents. In the school curriculum, we currently have sexual and reproductive health education integrated into the subjects such as religious and moral education, social studies, and integrated science. However, we have implementation gaps. A research by Awusabu and colleagues in 2017 revealed that the content in the school curriculum is highly abstinence focused. It's used and also uses a fear-based approach in delivering lessons to students. Also, another research revealed that mixed messages are given to adolescents. While teachers teach abstinence-only education, Ghana Health Service, as part of its school health education program, teaches adolescents safe sex practices. So to bridge this gap in the school curriculum, the government in 2018 developed a national CSC guideline. And this guideline sought to provide a framework for integrating CSC into the school curriculum in basic and high schools. However, the guideline had to be redrawn in 2019. And the reason was that there was a nationwide backlash sparked by the National Coalition for Proper Sexual Human Rights and Family Values, and with support from the World Congress of Families, religious leaders, and teachers. So this backlash led to a withdrawal of the CSC guideline. And given this backlash, the government in 2020 held a nationwide consultative meetings with stakeholders. And these consultative meetings led to the guideline being revised. And then currently it has been renamed the Reproductive Health Education Guideline, which is yet to be implemented. So the backlash in 2019 revealed that adoption and implementation of this new reproductive health education guideline will require more than a policy formulation. It will also require the support of all these stakeholders, religious leaders, religious leaders, parents, and teachers. So in view of the critical role of these stakeholders in reproductive health education implementation, I conducted my research to identify the determinants that could influence their intention to support its implementation in Ghana. So my research was guided by the theory of planned behavior and its most recent formulation, the reason action approach. These theories were used because they explain how individual attitudes, perceived norms, behavioral control influences an individual's intention to engage in a specific behavior. The theories hold that behavior is best predicted by intentions, while intention is also predicted by attitude, perceived norms, and then perceived behavioral control. An attitude refers to the individual's evaluation of the outcome of performing the behavior, whether the outcome will be good or bad. When done, subjective norms also refers to an individual's perception as to whether important reference persons in his or her life, like religious leaders, expect them to perform the behavior. And perceived behavioral control also explains the extent to which the individual feels he's capable and has control over performing the behavior. So for my study one, my methods, I used a multi-method approach. I used both qualitative and quantitative approaches to identify the determinants of adoption and implementation among the stakeholders. And my studies were conducted in the Greater Accra, Northern, and Upper East regions of Ghana. And my participants included religious leaders, teachers, and parents. My study one, the first study I did, explored underlying factors influencing Christian leaders' adoption and implementation of sexuality education in Bolgatanga, Ghana. I held in-depth interviews with 15 Christian leaders, and I used thematic analysis approach to analyze my data. My findings revealed favorable attitudes towards educating adolescents about their sexual health. One leader, for example, specifically called that it is important for sexual health education to begin during childhood so that adolescents can understand the changes that occur in their bodies as they grow. And they even called that the sexual education program should be integrated into the school curriculum. However, despite these positive attitudes, most of the leaders called for abstinence-only education. They believe that teaching adolescents about contraceptives, which is a key component of comprehensive sexuality education, would lead to adolescents becoming sexually promiscuous, which can lead to unintended pregnancy. So we also sought to find out from them who they thought was more responsible for providing sexual and reproductive health education. And they cited teachers because they felt that students have more long contact hours with teachers. Therefore, they would listen to teachers more than their religious leaders when it comes to sexual and reproductive health. And my second study, I also explored religious leaders' perspectives on comprehensive sexuality education implementation in Ghana. So I held in-depth interviews with 25 religious leaders, both from the Christian and Muslim sects, from Greater Accra, Northern, and Upper East regions. And my findings also showed that religious leaders held negative attitudes towards comprehensive sexuality education. CSE was perceived as a foreign agenda and as something that could be brewed from the pit of hell. They thought that CSE was bad for children and so should not be implemented. And it was surprising to know that although religious leaders were at the forefront of the opposition in 2019, my findings revealed they had very limited knowledge about CSE and also about the national CSE guideline. And so for most of them, the first time they heard of the guideline was when it was being discussed in the media by conservative groups, and they joined in kicking against it. But they also indicated that they were willing and open to support CSE in Ghana only if they are consulted and involved in developing and making input into its content. For my third study, I investigated the determinants of parents' intentions to support reproductive health education in Ghana. I used a structured questionnaire to collect data from 387 parents in Bolgatanga municipality and Nabdam district in the Upper East region. My findings revealed a strong influence of social norms in shaping support for implementation of reproductive health education in schools. Parents had intentions to support reproductive health if they perceived their family members and friends expected them to do so. And also they had intention to support it if they perceived that important reference persons like religious leaders also were also in support of the reproductive health education. My finding also showed that outcome beliefs of reproductive health education shape parents' intention. So parents who perceive that reproductive health education would first of all help adolescents to abstain from sex and also help adolescents to practice safe sex had more intentions to support reproductive health education in school. So for my last study, I investigated teachers' intentions also to implement reproductive health education in schools. And I did a cross-sectional study with 384 teachers who taught either social studies, religious and moral education, or integrated science. And again, my findings also revealed positive teacher attitudes toward reproductive health educations. Teachers believe that providing reproductive health education to adolescents would help them to make informed decisions about their sexual health. However, teachers' intentions to implement reproductive education in schools was also dependent on social approval from pupils, colleague teachers, the district director of education, and then the parent-teacher associations. So, and despite the positive attitude of teachers, my study showed that teachers also lacked the practical skills to implement some of the topics, especially sensitive topics on condom demonstration. So in conclusion, my study showed that a limited consultation with religious leaders negatively affected the adoption of the CSC guideline. Many leaders perceive the guidelines as externally imposed and misaligned with Ghanaian values, which contributed to resistance and low support. The findings also show that acceptance and support for reproductive health education in Ghana are not shaped by individual attitudes alone, but are also deeply embedded in social norms. That is, people's expectations and opinions held by religious leaders and family and school system. It shapes people's intentions to support it or reject it. Also, my findings show that teacher capacity affects implementation of reproductive health. Although teachers in my study had positive attitude towards reproductive health education, it was clear that they had capacity challenges when it comes to them delivering practical lessons. So practical lessons like condom demonstration and then contraceptive use. So all in all, my thesis highlights the critical need for evidence-based reproductive health education. It also shows that for reproductive health education, work, especially in Ghana, it must be scientifically sound and socially accepted. So my recommendations is that there's the need for intervention developers, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the National Population Council, to engage with stakeholders, religious leaders, parents, and teachers very early in the design stage of reproductive health education. And then there's also the need for government through the Ministry of Education to invest in practical-based training for teachers to build their confidence and capacity to deliver lessons. And also capacity building should be accompanied by with teaching and learning materials for teachers and also a supportive environment like support supervision, mentorship, and coaching for teachers to be able to deliver lessons. And also finally, there's the need for reproductive health education to be designed with theory and evidence-based methods like intervention mapping, because I think that when we use such methods, the program would produce the positive sexual health outcomes among adolescents. Thank you.
Thank you for your nice and clear presentation, Mrs. Achigibah. We will now move to the events properly, and I would like to invite his first opponent, Professor Kai Jonas. He's Professor of Applied Social Psychology at this university.
Thank you very much, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, thank you very much for your beautiful presentation of your research. I want to congratulate you. I can totally understand that this is an incredibly important, but also a topic that is met with quite a bit of resistance. And so that you pushed through and that the thesis was finalized and is now there, I think is something we can all be very proud of. I have two questions, and one is actually more a question of clarification. In chapter 2 and 3, but also in the study on the teachers, you refer to the framework of Wiefering, which describes determinants of teachers to adopt sexual health education in schools. This was done in Dutch schools, so I would assume that there are differences between the Dutch and the Ghanaian context. But you don't really elaborate on this. Maybe you can inform us here a little bit more how you adopted this, where it was necessary, or where there are even commonalities.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your kind words and the compliment, good words for my thesis. So in response to your question, yes, the framework was used in Dutch school to assess adoption and implement teacher intentions to implement sex education in Dutch school. So I found it, even though it was not used in Ghana, I found it useful for my study because the framework used the theories of planned behavior and the reason action approach, assessing intentions of determinants of teachers' intention to implement. And because my thesis was focused on identify determinants of intention, I found it very important to adopt this framework to suit my context. Because based on the theories, I was also identifying determinants of adoption and implementation. So I agree that yes, in my study 2 and 3, these were studies focused on religious leaders. Yes, I had to use a framework used in Dutch school, but yes, so I use it because of the theories. The framework is backed by theories, and that theory was also applicable to my research. So that is why I use it. And I know that these theories have also been used in the Ghanaian context to identify determinants of students' intentions to use condoms. So that is why I found it relevant to adopt this framework for my study.
Okay, thank you for the answer. May I ask a second question? I was surprised that while I totally understand your theoretical approach of the theories that you now explained, also where they should be universal in its applicability, I was surprised that especially in studies 1 and 2, in chapters 2 and 3, you do not look into determinants such as tolerance. Tolerance of religious leaders or later teachers or parents towards other approaches, towards maybe novel ideas. And maybe you can elaborate why you didn't include this determinant that, at least from my perspective, seems quite prominent or could be prominent in such a research approach.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your question. Yes, I did not include tolerance in my study. Yes, so using the two theories, I think that is also these theories. I use them as, I would say, an explorative tool to analyze determinants of intentions. So I did not really, because I was trying to really identify the determinants of intention, I focused more on the perceived norms, attitudes, and then the perceived behavioral control. So I think that is one limitation of these theories I use. They do not really capture all the determinants, social and also the environmental determinants of intentions to teach reproductive health education. And so I think in future research, this is something that could be explored, going beyond the determinants, perceived norms and perceived behavioral control and attitudes, to also investigate how the social and environmental factors influence teachers' intentions.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. I'll give the word back to the...
Okay, thank you. The next in opposition will be Dr. John de Witt. He's Professor of Interdisciplinary Social Science at Utrecht University. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, let me first of all also congratulate you with your dissertation and the important research that you report. And I would really also like to include your supervisors in my congratulations. You address a truly important issue of the comprehensive sexuality education for young people in Ghana, and you focus on understanding the factors that affect the support of religious leaders, teachers, and parents, almost a 360-degree approach. And that's really key to understand that for the effective implementation. So your work, I find it critical and also commendable. But of course, I also have a few questions, which is, as you know, my role today. And my first question really is one about clarification. You focus on comprehensive sexuality education and you distinguish that from abstinence-only education. But throughout your dissertation, and in particular also in relation to specific studies, you use a range of terms. Your title refers to reproductive health education, but in other chapters, you also refer to sexual and reproductive health education. You talk about sexuality education. Can you explain a bit whether or not these terms mean something different, or whether you use them loosely or even as synonyms?
Opponent, thank you so much for your kind words and also for your question. So the terms I used were not, I would say they were not used loosely. So the first term in my background, I had mentioned sexual and reproductive health education. So I think from our independent days to now, we call it, before the CSE guideline, we call it sexual and reproductive health education. And because there were gaps in the curriculum providing sexual and reproductive health education, that is why the government developed the National Comprehensive Sexuality Education Guideline to provide a well-harmonized, to make the sexuality education more well-harmonized and also to meet international standards. So we went from sexual and reproductive health education to comprehensive sexuality education. But because there was a backlash, because Ghanaians did not want to hear the word comprehensive, yes, and then especially sexuality, the consultative meetings resulted in stakeholders agreeing that it should be called reproductive health education, because I think most Ghanaians were more comfortable with the word reproductive health and not the mention of sexuality education. So it now came down to reproductive health education. Yeah, so that is how the transition has been.
But in terms of your studies, so in studies in chapters 4 and 5, you refer to reproductive health education. In chapter 3 or chapter 2, it's about sexuality education, sexual and reproductive health education. In chapter 3 is comprehensive sexuality education. Did that mean that the participants in your studies answered questions about something else? Or did they answer questions about the same type of education but labeled differently?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you. So for my study, let me use my study 3, among religious leaders on comprehensive sexuality education. So this study was conducted after the backlash. So after the backlash, the role religious leaders played, I conducted this study to really understand their perspectives. So the central questions were on comprehensive sexuality education. And then after the backlash, when we developed the reproductive health education guideline, the last 2 studies then focused on would parents trying to understand whether parents would support this reproductive health education in schools, and also whether teachers would want to implement this reproductive health education. Yes. So they answered different.
Yes, but was it explained to people what you meant? So when you asked, let's just do this simply, do you support comprehensive sexuality education? Do you support sexual and reproductive health education? Was it then explained what you meant? And I'll explain why I think this is important in a minute.
Yes. So
was it defined basically?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I defined comprehensive sexuality education. It was defined to respondents to know that this includes abstinence, education on abstinence, and also lessons on contraceptive, safe sex practices. So yes, I defined these concepts to my participants to help them responses.
Thanks a lot. Because the reason why I asked is if we go to your study in chapter 4, you find something that I find fascinating, or you report something that's fascinating, and then you summarize. You refer to it in your summary presentation as well. So with the parents, you find overall that they look at sexuality education favorably. And I was just wondering what sexuality education they had in mind, because you find that a positive association with outcome beliefs about sexuality education in general, but also about abstinence education in particular. And sort of as a starting point for your work, you sort of you juxtapose those two things, saying that, comprehensive sexuality education is the more preferred way, and because abstinence only education doesn't work and is perhaps not scientifically sound or perhaps not even ethical. So I was trying to make sense of how it could be that both of those types of outcomes beliefs were related to people's support. What does it tell you? How do you interpret this finding?
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent. So for the parents among teachers, yes, I measured the outcome beliefs. I measured abstinence beliefs on abstinence only education. So
Yes.
yes, and then beliefs about more comprehensive forms. So the sex education in general, in my thesis, I think I was looking at sex education that did not include safe sex practices. And then the abstinence plus or comprehensive sex education was implied sex education that also taught about safe sex practices. So these two were, I distinguished it for parents to understand the two different terms, to be able to get their intentions,
Yes.
which one they would support.
Yes. But I'm not sure, Pro-Rector, whether I can ask another question.
Small one?
Yeah. Well, no, the thing I don't understand, and perhaps you want to discuss that at a different point. People who are more favorable about abstinence education or have more favorable outcome beliefs are also more supportive of sex education more generally, and I did find that's quite surprising. Do you agree with that?
What was your question? I mean,
What do you agree whether it's surprising? I mean, that was implied in the. Yeah.
I think, I'm sorry, I didn't really understand.
Well, you find basically that people who have more favorable outcome beliefs about abstinence education are more supportive of comprehensive sexuality education. Do you find that surprising?
I think I would say I do not really find it so surprising.
Okay.
Because even though in Ghana, the context favors abstinence only education, and most people tend to speak about it in public because of the social expectations. But we also have people who believe that we need to teach adolescents about safe sex practices. So you engage them individually and they will tell you their genuine perspective that yes, we talk about abstinence only sex education, but I also know that adolescents are not always able to abstain from sex, and we need to teach them safe sex practices. So most people would agree in public, go in favor of abstinence, but individual beliefs go for comprehensive form of education.
okay.
Thank you very much for the clarification.
Thank you. We'll now move to the next in opposition, which is Dr. Benedict Okran. He's lecturer in the Department of Arts and Social Sciences and head of the Department of Languages at Our Lady of Apostles College of Education in Cape Coast, Ghana.
Thank you. Candidates, I would like to take the cue of other opponents and then congratulate you on the scope of your work. I think your work is very important because it discusses sexuality education and its forms, both abstinence and then comprehensive sexuality education. I also want to congratulate you on the participants you selected for all your studies, parents, teachers, and religious leaders. These were individuals who are very much involved in the implementation of sex education at homes and in schools and in communities. And they also played a key role in the rejection of the CSE guidelines. So my first question has to do with tensions and agreements between religious leaders and then their subordinates. To explain, in chapter 2 You examined religious leaders, pastors' views on sexuality education. Then later in the subsequent chapter, you questioned religious leaders, some of whom head pastors in the previous chapter about their opinions on comprehensive sexuality education. So comparing those studies and examining the views that came from the same constituency, did you observe any tensions or similarities in the opinions that you elicited from religious leaders and then the pastor that actually shepherded these religious groups?
Okay. Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for your kind words, compliments, and also for your question. I would say that similarities, let me first touch on similarities between the study among Christian leaders and also the study among religious leaders. Yes, I discovered some similarities. And the first similarity had to do with, in both studies, I had some leaders showing positive attitudes towards educating adolescents about safe practices. Some held the view that, yes, in their churches, they preach about moral education, they preach about abstinence, but they also know that in reality, adolescents engage in sexual practices. So the best thing for them is to educate them about safe sex. But because of, I would say, the challenge, religious leaders face the challenge of standing on their purpose, educate adolescents about sex education, comprehensive sexual education. So some of them invite health workers to teach adolescents about safe sex practices. Yes, so I found these two in both studies. And the tensions, yes, there were also some who had negative attitudes in both studies. But then one thing I also got from my study among the religious leaders revealed that the hierarchy, the administrative hierarchy of religious institutions affects or has an effect on individuals' decisions. So religious leaders from the subnational level, like the greater northern region, upper east region, even though had their personal views, opinions, could not clearly make the final decision for maybe CSC. They had to rely on the authorities from the higher level. So speaking to some Catholics, yes, they had their views, but the Catholic Bishop Conference has the final say. And also speaking to the Christian Council, the Methodists, the Presbyterian priests also had their personal views. But all in all, it had the final say had to come from above, that is their Christian Council. Yeah, so there were some bits of similarities and also some sort of tension. I will not really say totally tension, but the administrative hierarchies affected most of them, their final decisions on their comprehensive sex education.
I asked this question because most studies on sexuality education in Ghana study tensions in whole groups, like religious leaders, without paying attention to intra-group tensions. So I believe your study gives a good pointer that we should pay attention to intra-group tensions that play out in how sex education is implemented. My next question has to do with positionality. Under the strengths and limitations, you stated that your positionality may have shaped the responses participants gave in your qualitative studies. That was the only part I saw positionality. I want to find out from you, taking a look back, can you please share with me one or two instances you believe your positionality as an indigene, as a former sexual educator or current sexual educator, as someone who speaks the same language? Do you think any of these characteristics in your positionality had any bear on the kind of responses that participants give to you, particularly in your first two studies, the qualitative studies? Can you share any insights on that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. Yes, also, I would say that, Yes, I have worked in the Upper East region, especially on the sexual reproductive health interventions. And for most of these leaders, this was my first time of meeting them. I was part of the data collection processes. This was my first time of meeting them. And so for some of them, maybe I would say they're Catholics because I'm Catholic. And so maybe that's, should I say, identity may have also maybe influenced the response, especially from the Catholic priest I interviewed. Yes. But for most of them, the Muslims and also the other denominations, I had not met them, so we had no familiarity. So for them, I would say my position did not really influence the responses they gave because we had no prior familiarity with each other. But for some, yeah, maybe from the Catholic sect,
Okay.
possibly.
Okay, so a follow-up question.
Small, short.
All right, very quickly. So the examples you've given are from your positionality, but what sort of perceptions participants may have had about the topic? A very controversial topic. Did you have any challenges giving access to gatekeepers, any challenges at all?
Yes, especially my study among the religious leaders, both Christians and Muslims. We wrote letters to let them know about the study. We explained about the study. And getting some of them to interview was a bit of a challenge because of the topic comprehensive sexuality education. So we had to keep following up with calls. We had to keep explaining why we were doing this study. And we had them giving us the responses. So initially we faced some bit of barriers getting the participants to even give us appointments for the interviews, but we managed to navigate through the explanations behind why we were doing the study. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Okram. Then we move to the next opposition, which is Dr. Sarah Stutterheim. She's Associate Professor of Health Promotion at this university.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I too want to compliment you on your comprehensive dissertation where you report mixed method studies. I like the way there's a combination of the qualitative studies to elucidate beliefs and the quantitative studies to look at the ways in which they predict behavior. Now, as a child of an evangelical pastor, I was very keen to read chapter 2 and 3. And our conversation today has circulated much around religious leaders and their perspective with regard to abstinence-only education programs. I guess the grand conclusion from the two chapters is that the religious leaders would only be on board if it's an abstinence-only program. Except science shows us that abstinence-only doesn't work, as indicated by my colleague, Professor DeWitt. And additionally, abstinence-only programs can be quite detrimental. They push adolescent sexuality into the taboo and unspoken sphere. They increase behaviors that contribute to, for example, teenage pregnancy, and they promote stigma and stigma by association. Except in chapter 3, religious leaders claim that comprehensive sex ed causes more harm than good. And I would say that it's maybe the other way around. So in your chapters, you describe some of the beliefs held by religious leaders, and I just want to list a few so that we can dive into these. One is premarital sex is a sin and the work of the devil. Another is kids won't have premarital sex if their parents raise them right. And a third is teaching sex ed promotes promiscuity and makes people gay. And these are just a few. So with the understanding that these beliefs are not in line with science, I wonder then about our role as scientists. Do we, as scientists and as health promoters, have a moral obligation to correct? Do we engage and say, hey, but that's not quite what the science says? And if we do, how do we do that? And when do we do that? I can imagine in an interview, you wouldn't stop somebody and say, not so sure about that, but how would you navigate that? And how did you navigate that in the course of doing this work?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your compliments and also for your question. So in response to the question, I would say that yes, as scientists, we have an obligation to change these beliefs. held by religious leaders and conservative groups about comprehensive sexuality education. Because based on the evidence, it is clearly that abstinence-only sex education does not work. It does not only lead adolescents to engage in unsafe sex practices, it doesn't also provide them with the skills they need to be assertive and also negotiate and also avoid violence. And also, so we can use the evidence we have to engage religious leaders. And in this engagement, I would say that it has to be a reflective engagement, not passing on information. And also, we need to use our messaging to change these beliefs. We have to draw it from a public health perspective for people to understand the consequences of moral education on adolescents. And with reflective dialogues, religious leaders need to be encouraged to really delve down to know why they support moral education, their experiences, their feelings. And then I believe that through these dialogues, their beliefs can be gradually changed. And I also believe that we can use advocacy, evidence-based advocacy, to also change these beliefs. So based on our interventions and the evidence, I know we can have these advocacy messages targeted at specific groups, religious leaders and parents, so that we can be able to change their beliefs around moral education, to understand that moral education does not work in the practical world when it comes to adolescent sexual health issues.
Okay, so what you're saying is we have to engage in dialogue and then change their attitudes or beliefs that shape their attitudes, right?
Yeah, we have to engage them in dialogues, and we also have to have interventions targeted at these religious leaders. So I think somewhere in my thesis, I made a recommendation that CSE program should also have components that target interventions that target religious leaders. So I believe that maybe in Ghana, we can also have specially designed interventions targeted at parents, religious leaders, and teachers to see how we can change their attitudes in addition to the dialogues and also the advocacy messages we would have.
Yeah, I wonder whether or not we could be effective in changing these beliefs that are fundamentally rooted in people's worldviews and religious beliefs as well. One of the claims in the dissertation was that comprehensive sex education is another form of oppression from the West. And this requires us to engage with discourse in and around colonialism and perhaps also signpost that Christianity is a Western import product. But these are tough ones, really tough ones to navigate, religious views and discourses around colonialism. And I wonder whether or not our health promotion toolbox gives us what we need, the answers that we need to do this. I'm looking at the time, so maybe a quick response on whether or not you think we can actually do this?
Yes, I think we can do that. And also we can do that maybe as health promotion people. We might not be able to do that on our own. We will need also religious leaders who have liberal views, religious leaders who also have background experience in health, in other fields.
Yeah.
Such people have liberal minds, such people understand the reality of sexual health problems of adolescents. So when we have champions among religious leaders, we have champions, parent champions, teacher champions. Together with them, I believe that with time, gradually, these beliefs can be changed. It will not be a one-time thing. It will take time. But I believe that if we have champions among these stakeholders, it will happen someday.
Okay. I appreciate your hope and optimism. Share it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's clear we need also endurance. Okay, thank you, Dr. Sutherham. The next in opposition is Professor Rick Crutzen. He's Professor of Behavior, Change and Technology.
Thank you. Also, my compliments for your work. First of all, I really appreciate that you focus on determinants and really dove into that context. That's really nice. It's also nice to see that after your supervisor, I'm referring to Dr. Kruger now, the next generation of people from Ghana is defending their thesis here. So that's good to see. And I appreciate that while your ultimate beneficiaries might be adolescents, that you involve all those religious leaders, teachers, and so on. So that's really commendable. And it's also a nice bridge to my first question. And it starts with chapter 2, and I kind of want to continue the conversation you already had with Dr. Okran. Because what I appreciated there is you were able to involve all these Christian leaders and talk about this topic of sexuality. I was really impressed by that. So I thought, like, how did you do that? So then I read the study procedures, and then you say, I went by, I passed and handed out invitation letters. I thought, that's very easy. But probably, and you already said a little bit about that, it was not that easy. So can you tell me what your magic trick was there to get those people involved?
Okay, highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for your compliment and also for your question. Yes, so I think earlier I did mention that in the study setting, Upper East region, I've worked there for quite some years. And I think I also used the relationships we have with some of the church leaders. So colleagues who were also church members supported us to get to these religious leaders. Also friends who I knew were also part of their congregation also supported us to also get access to them. And I also think because of the organization I worked with, we mostly have some engagements with them. So we also have that. So I also leverage that that platform to make access to get them to agree to participate in the study.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I already figured there would be more to it than just these letters. And it also brings me, like you said, like you have already established a relationship, but then I read also that you involved a Dutch female undergraduate student from this university and a female research assistant from the Youth Harvest Foundation. So that also made me wonder, like, okay, I think it's very nice to involve those folks, but did you experience any challenges there? Or good aspects in terms of like differences in terms of maybe culturally or gender-wise when involving these people in the data collection procedures?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. So a Dutch student was involved in data collection and to help us address the barriers in terms of gender and also. Yeah, so she was accompanied by a staff of Youth Harvest during the interviews so that she was introduced to the participants by the staff so that barrier will be broken for her to be able to really conduct the interviews. And I'll say that gender did not really, the gender of the interviewer, I would say, did not affect the responses of the parts, from the interviewees. It did not have, reading through the transcripts, I did not see that influence of the gender of the data collector because participants were open enough and gave us rich information based on the audio recordings and also the transcripts I read through.
Okay, good to hear. And then I think you plan to involve 21 participants and 15 ultimately participated. Do you know anything about these other folks? And with that I mean, do you know certain about, like, do they have different view on sexuality, or are they from a different religious domination or something like that? Do you know anything about those who refuse to participate?
For those who refuse to participate, I don't really have a view. Yeah, they were all leaders, Christian leaders, evangelical, Catholic. But that is what I know, that they were from these leaders, but I do not really have a detailed understanding or view of who they really were. I just knew they were.
Yeah, so you would say that those 15 are more or less representative of the segment of Christian leaders that were in that region?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were either heading their own churches or pastors under another senior pastor in the church.
Okay. Then something completely different. I heard you were afraid that I'm going to ask you something about cyber, and I'm going to do. But you don't have to be, and you don't have to be afraid, because I'm not going to ask any technical questions. I basically want to talk about the conclusions of it, because when I look at this nice figure that you produced, my compliments, I would say that more or less all the determinants, all the beliefs, they scored 4 out of on a 5-point scale. So there's very little room for improvement. And I think something like that you also stated in your discussion section. And then I look at your outcome, and that is intention, and you explain about 50% of intention, more or less. And we know that intention is not behavior. So in the best case, that's maybe also 50%. So then you explain 50% of 50%. So let's say a quarter of the behavior you can explain with that. But that leaves the other 3/4, like 75%. So do you think what do you think, like, what do we need there? Like, is there something else? Meaning you included already a lot of determinants, but do you have any ideas about what have we been missing, what might explain the other part?
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for your question. I would say that, yes, in my tool, I included some other construct, but in the analysis, because I focused on identifying the determinants, that is attitude, perceived norms, and perceived behavioral control, I did not include the other constructs in the analysis. So I would say that the other things I measured, like maybe the gender, socioeconomic status, could have also maybe explained the difference, or maybe could have also had an impact in the outcome.
So these would then be non-changeable determinants. But do you also think it's okay? I can imagine that the role of gender and sex is quite important, but it's quite hard to target, quote unquote, with an intervention. But do you also have ideas about other things that might be important that could be targeted by an intervention?
Sorry, could you take the question?
I think you said, like, when I asked, do you have other determinants that might be important? You mentioned things like sex or things like that, but they are not changeable by an intervention then afterward. So I was thinking, do you have an idea about other constructs that might be important for future interventions?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much. Yes, so I think there are other determinants. So for instance, when I take the school setting, so the school policy be a very good determinant, and also even the environment, the school environment could also be a very important determinant. And when I take parents, their socioeconomic background could be a determinant, and also religious leaders. Earlier on, I did mention about the administrative hierarchy could also be a determinant that maybe in future research these other determinants could also be explored.
Thank you very much. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Kruse. Then the next in opposition is Dr. Vrouwtje Mewissen. She is senior researcher at the Municipal Health Center Rotterdam-Rijnmond. Floor is yours.
Dear candidate, I'm not allowed to say dear Augustina yet, so I will do it later. Sorry, I did. I'm very happy to be part of this ceremony today and to see the end result of your PhD project. So thank you also to Rob and John for inviting me today. We started this journey together several years ago, but unfortunately I could not stay until the end because of other things. But well, at least we finish it here together today. So I'm still a little bit part of the whole project. You did some very interesting and important studies in a very dynamic setting, also showing that as an applied researcher you need to have a lot of flexibility. Because as was already mentioned a little bit, also during your presentation, originally your PhD would be the effect and process evaluation of the national CSE. But then suddenly you needed plan B, because no program would be implemented in the end. But your thesis shows you did very well with plan B. So I've read your work with a lot of pleasure and interest, and I'm also really looking forward to discuss at least one thing with you, depending on the time. And I'm really curious on your ideas and viewpoints now you have done all this work. So in 2019, the implementation failed. Now there are new guidelines going to be implemented, I don't know, this year, next year, what the plan is. And we have the results of your hard work. So if you now reflect back on everything that happened, what happened in 2019, the results of your study, the new program, what are your expectations? What are your expectations when this new program will be implemented? Will it be a success? And if yes, why do you think it will be a success? And if it's not going to be a success, then why not? What more do we need to do?
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for your compliments and also for your question. I would say that if this new guideline, reproductive health education, is going to be implemented, I would say it's going to be a success, because this new guideline was developed out of stakeholder consultation with religious leaders, teacher unions, and parents. And the name was agreed on by all stakeholders because they felt more comfortable with the name reproductive health. And this time round, they had more information about the content, so they know what is exactly in the content. And I'm sure that from the findings, it shows that they are open to support its implementation if they are involved, if they are consulted and involved. So I believe that after this consultation and involving them, if government is to now roll it out in schools, we will get the support of all these stakeholders to implement it. Yeah, so I think that when the time is due, this time around, we will not get a backlash, but we'll get support from all these necessary stakeholders, because they've all been involved in developing, coming out with this new guideline. Thank you.
Then I'm also going to be a little bit surprised, like my colleague, because do you think it's going to be a success because the program has been changed so much that the religious leaders now accept it, but maybe it's not effective? So yes, it's going to be implemented fully with fidelity, but maybe it's not so effective. Or did you find the magic trick to still be sure that the content is evidence-based and everybody likes it and is going to implement it?
Sorry, I think I'm trying to understand the question very well.
So the question is, what is the magic trick, why it's going to work this time? Because you say everybody was consulted, but if I read what all the comments are, especially from religious leaders, and they want to be consulted, but they also have a very strong opinion on that it should be on abstinence and all kind of other things. So is the program changed so much that it is fully in line with what the religious leaders like, and that's why it's going to be implemented? Or did you do some magic trick that still the religious leaders like the program, but the program is also still evidence-based?
Okay, thank you so much, Augustina, for the clarification. I think the contention with the old guideline, the CSE, was with the word comprehensive. Most of the leaders understood comprehensive to mean young children, even from kindergarten, primary, were going to be taught about sexual intercourse. So they did not want to hear the word comprehensive. So after the consultation and the term comprehensive was agreed on and taken out, and it's now reproductive health education guideline, they are now more comfortable with it. And I'll say that the content has not changed from the previous content. But because of the word comprehensive, it showed most of them, like, they were not comfortable with the words. And I think even in Ghana still, the word comprehensive section, like when it comes, is attached to sexuality education, it's a big problem. Yes, so I would say that the content has not deviated so much, but the word and the name comprehensive was what really was the problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Then my next question is that I know from the work from John and Ellen in the past that if you interview all those different groups, and I could see it a little bit in your results, that everybody's always pointing to the other one to take the first step. So if you talk with religious leaders, they say, no, it's the parents, it's their responsibility, and parents point to the teachers, no, it's their responsibility, and teachers point back to religious leaders, and everybody points to somebody else. So that seems like it's like start. So where do you start? Although the program is not changed, stakeholders are involved, you say that, but maybe you still need interventions for the different groups. So where do you start with moving those three groups?
Thank you, Ali esteemed opponent. Where do I start?
That's a very challenging question.
Yes. So yes, I think from my thesis, it came out clearly that religious leaders were those who had so much influence on the other groups. So I would first start with engaging religious leaders and also using those who have liberal background, those who really understand the public health benefits of sexuality education, comprehensive sexual education, to engage religious leaders. And getting their approval will really shape the other groups' intention, because they can influence parents and teachers to also have positive attitudes and support implementation of the reproductive health education.
Hora est.
You may finish your answer just briefly in 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. So I would first start with the religious leaders, get their support, and also engage, use them to reach out to the teachers and also the parent. But in addition to that, separately, certainly also have separate engagements with the teacher, especially teacher unions. They are very strong in Ghana, and also the parent-teacher associations. These are also a very strong group. Also engage them individually, whilst also leveraging liberal religious leaders to also support getting all the groups to support reproductive health education.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear Ms. Achigibah, the time allowed for the defense is now past. The degree committee will now discuss the quality of your thesis and the defense. And I would like to ask you and your company to leave this room. After the deliberation, the beadle will come and invite you to come back to this room.
Please all rise. I will invite you to come this way.
you speak, you stand.
Please. Please be seated.
You make a picture
Dear,
for presentation.
yes. Dear Ms. Augustina Achigibah, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict, taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Ruiter is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch customary, university custom, and I invite your supervisor now to take the floor and do his thing.
Please all rise.
Dear candidate, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
Thank you. By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Augustina Dechegme Achigibah, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Please be seated.
You can start.
Now I can say Doctor.
Hey, doctor.
Dr. Augustina Dechegme Achigibah. Congratulations. I think it was in 2016 that I went to Tamale for a workshop. And I made a presentation. And then Augustina was then working for a different organization called Youth Alive. So she was also an attendant in the workshop. In the course of my presentation, during the break hours, she walked over to me and said, "I'd like to work with you." And then I said, "Well, we work in different organizations, so that's not going to come easily." And then I told her that when we have an opening, she should apply. So not long, and there was an opening, and when we look at the applications, Augustina's application was one of them. So she went through the interview, and she became a successful candidate to join the Youth Harvest Foundation as a program officer. And that is how we started working together. But unlike me, Augustina went to one of the best high schools in Ghana. It's called Achimota School. And so myself and her, we used to tease each other. When I speak English or she speaks, and I say, "Well, because you speak better than me because you went to a better school." And then she would tease me. And that was when I told her that the Achimota School graduates I know, they mostly get to do a PhD. So what was her plans to sustain that? And at one point she told me that she would like to do a PhD. So I said, okay, I need to talk to the two professors, Prof. Rob and then Frokia. And I think they welcomed the idea. And that is how she got started. I was part of the process of developing the guidelines that got into trouble. So I was also very excited that we could design her work along the implementation of the guidelines, until we all wake up one day and realize that there was a whole hullabaloo in Ghana that the comprehensive sexuality education is satanic education. That came as a bit of a frustration because we had done a lot of work around it, but Augustina could not continue on that journey. And she had to rethink, and thanks to the support from Maastricht University, we could come up with a new idea to say that, well, if it cannot be implemented, then let's go to find out how we can make a contribution to the next program to be able to implement it. And I think ever since Augustina got busy with this work, it has not been an easy journey also for her personally. She had to go through some personal challenges herself, but she has been resilient through it all. She did not give up, although at a point in time she was not very happy with me anymore for putting her through this trouble. And I told her, yes, that is how Frokia put me through the same trouble. But she was resilient, she stood for it. And towards the end, it even became more challenging. Her mom's health was failing at some point. She had to change job. And in all those difficulties, she stood her feet and went through the process and was able to put together a very beautiful piece of work that we can all be proud of going forward. In today, I was telling them that I am so happy with your confidence that the new program will be implemented. So you and I will soon be flying back to Ghana, and I'm going to watch you push the new program to be implemented. But we are very proud of what you have done and the resilience. You are a good example for the next generation of young people in Ghana. And I have every confidence that you go out and make an important mark. And today I can tell Rob that I made a presentation somewhere and somebody came and said, yeah, because you are Maastricht trained, that is why. So there is a name out there, and I don't doubt that you are going to even do much better. Congratulations, Dr. Achigibah.
Thank you.
Okay, dear Dr. Achigibah, also on behalf of the university, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. And I would like to extend in my congratulations your family present and maybe online and watching us. I think you have made a remarkable achievement, and I hope you will think back to this day in good spirits. Hereby I conclude this session and thank all the people present, in particular the members of the committee for their role and experience, and also Professor De Wit from FAR. Thank you all. Session is closed.
Please all rise.